Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever thought anything was impossible or the challenge was too great, then do we have the Sometimes Brilliant show for you. Today I'll be talking with Larry Brilliant, pioneering physician, global philanthropist, and one of the key players in the eradication of smallpox, which has saved millions, if not billions of lives to come. He's also the best-selling author of a brilliant new book and a must-read about faith and courage, Sometimes Brilliant. And that's just what we'll be talking about today, about the impossible adventure of a spiritual seeker and visionary physician who helped conquer the worst disease in history. That plus we'll talk about the importance of jukeboxes, wavy gravy in the hog farm bus, the power of a pomegranate, Ben Spock, Martin Luther King, Ram Dass, time off for bad behavior, what in the world 420 and the Bhagavad Gita, gotcha, have to do with anything, who's the world's tallest white monkey, eating car tires, and what Grandma Ida and Electric Punch have to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Larry. Are you ready to shine?
Oh, that was great fun. Thank you very much, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Larry, for joining us on the show. So before we dive right into things, I've got to take us back in time a little bit. Would you mind sharing with us, what do jukeboxes and the mafia or Jewish mafia have to do with anything?
So my dad, who was born in Belarus, as we used to say, halfway between Minsk and Pinsk, he came to Detroit when he was 7. He came to the United States when he was 7, and he grew up in a very rough time. And there were a lot of Jewish gangs in Detroit and Chicago. You've heard, of course, about the mob and the mafia. But there were Jewish gangs. One was called the Purple Gang. A lot of other kind of earning your living on the street kind of stuff. And so when he was 13, 14, 15, he ran numbers. When we say run numbers, today we're thinking about somebody who's doing computing. But running numbers meant you'd go and take bingo cards or lotto-like cards, illegal at that time, door to door. You'd collect the money, people would make their bets, and then if they win, you'd carry large sums of cash back to them. You had to be pretty tough. So my dad became a boxer, and he was sort of a street tough, street smart boxer. And then he went into the coin-operated machine business, Nickelodeons, jukeboxes. And that was his job, and he became the head of the jukebox world for Detroit, Michigan. And, cash-operated businesses were very desirable to the mafia. So the mafia tried to buy his business, or said another way, make him a deal he couldn't refuse. And he resisted. And he wound up being asked by Bobby Kennedy to testify in Washington at the McClellan Committee investigations into the mafia. And my dad was one of the most wonderful, charismatic, loving guys for a tough guy. And he did testify. And the mafia, of course, firebombed his office, threatened my brother and I. And we grew up in a world that was ostensibly immigrant, aspiring middle class, Jewish mostly, but it was always tinged with this world that the jukebox business brought us into.
It's interesting. I never connected the dots in reading it until now, and I'm thinking back on interviews we've had on epigenetics, and there's one book from Mark Wallin in particular. It didn't start with you, meaning epigenetically, things that you have in you are from your dad and your dad's dad and beyond. And your dad had your cells in him when he was a tough guy on the streets. And that may explain a little bit about your spearheading one heck of a movement.
I think it explains more of my interest in coins.
Okay.
Because when I was a kid, he used to bring me into his office, and I was a little hyperactive, so he would give me a bag of nickels and a coin book, a Whitman coin book, and I would try to fill all the coins in. Years later, when I was living in India, and I hurt my back, and I couldn't work for a couple of months, I started studying the Kushan Empire, the Mughal Empire, the Hindu Empire, Buddhist Empire. I found the ancient coins of India to be a way into Sanskrit and Pali, and through them a little better understanding, I think, of how religion played a role in the rise and the fall of India. I really love that. So
fantastic.
Thanks, Dad.
Woohoo! So let's go from there, and let's ask real briefly about the power of a pomegranate and who's Elaine.
So Elaine was my high school sweetheart.
Mm-hmm.
She was 15 and I was 16, and we dated in high school. And then when I went to the University of Michigan, we dated. We sort of lost touch with each other for a couple of years, and I was in medical school. And one day I went to a performance of the Living Theater, Julian Beck's Living Theater, and for reasons that are unbeknownst to me, I was carrying a pomegranate. I had a date. We sat down, and sitting in front of me with another date was Elaine. Mm-hmm. And I saw her, and I fell in love with her all over again. And for some reason, unbeknownst to me, I reached into my bag and I just handed her a pomegranate. And when we were dating in high school, we were really geeks, and we loved Greek mythology and double acrostics. And a pomegranate was the symbol of Persephone, who lived 6 months in heaven and 6 months in hell, and Demeter, her mother. So this was sort of a symbol to, I think, rekindle our romance, that her time, my time in hell was over, and it was time for us to get back together in heaven. And we've been married for 47 years.
Amazing. And I guess you could give all credit to a pomegranate.
There you go.
So can you tell us, if we go back in a few years to college, how did you end up hearing Martin Luther King, and how did he change your life?
So I went to a school called Mumford. We used to call it Pink and Blue Jew U, because it was painted pink and blue. And it was a great public school. I've only been to public schools. I've never been to a private school except to teach. I don't think I was a particularly distinguished student. I was good, but this was a very great school. And by chance, they gave us a math test one day in school by surprise, and I won it. And it was the Michigan Actuarial Society gave me a scholarship to Michigan. So I went. Otherwise, I never could have afforded to go to Michigan. My dad's business had just been destroyed by his testimony in Washington. So I went to Michigan, and they put me into the honors atomic physics program. Well, that felt really flattering for a moment, until I realized that atomic physics, they didn't yet have the term nuclear physics. Mm-hmm. That meant something about a bomb. And I was not happy about that. My dad got cancer, and he was dying, and I didn't have the inner resources to deal with my dad dying. I loved him more than anybody. And I locked myself in my room in Michigan, an unhappy atomic physics major, mm-hmm. my dad dying, reading superhero comic books and eating candy. And I don't think I went out for weeks. And then I saw a little ad in the paper that the speaker on campus was Martin Luther King. He wasn't yet well known. He hadn't yet won his Nobel Prize. There hadn't yet been the Mississippi Summer or the Poor People's March. But something that I can't explain compelled me. And I got my fat ass out of bed, and I trundled down through a blinding storm. And most people think that rain falls vertically. In Ann Arbor, some days it falls horizontally, and the wind blows it in your face. And I got to this big hall, Angel Hall, as it's called, mm-hmm. and it seated 4,000 people, but there were hardly 100 kids there. And Martin Luther King got on stage, because of the rain. Martin Luther King got on stage and said, this way there'll be more of me to go around. You all come on up. And half of us got on stage and half sat in front of him. And he stayed with us for almost the whole day. And I had never heard anybody talk like that. It's not just that he talked about a time when his children would play with white children and be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Mm-hmm. It's not just that he talked about the arc of the moral universe bending towards justice, but what he said was the arc of the moral universe will bend towards justice only if you get off of your butt and you jump up and you grab that arc and you twist it and bend it and pull it towards justice, because there is a role for you in making the world a kinder, more loving, more equitable place. There is a job for you. There's a role for you. And that he made me an activist. We were all infected with the virus of activism and I think love at that time. And everybody who was on stage, who was sitting with him that day, all the kids at Michigan, we were never the same. We all went down to Mississippi or Alabama. I stayed with my dad, who was sick, and then rejoined. I got arrested with Martin Luther King in a march in Chicago. It was certainly the most life-changing experience I ever had. You know, you look back on your life and you say, what were those things that I did intentionally, the planning that I did? And none of that ever really factored very much into my life. But what are the things that just happened that changed my life? The meetings, the great people. And this was, but far and away, the most important thing that had ever happened to me.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. Before we continue, your hands, I guess, when they move around, they're on the microphone. And so I hear kind of a sound as you're speaking.
These hands?
I know.
I will get rid of them.
Use the hands, but in the mic here. So you're speaking with your hands, which is great. So from there, talking about big events and big events that aren't necessarily sort of like carrying a pomegranate, sort of like going to Martin Luther King. Another one of these early events that took place, I think, was a motorcycle ride and nitrous oxide.
Yes. Well, my dad did die. My grandfather, that night when we were sitting Shiva, came to my brother and I and said, "Your father has died, and now I will be your father." And I told you about coins,
the nickel,
because of my dad. I asked my grandfather if he would like to see this rare coin that I had found in a jukebox, and he marched up the steps.
1917, 1918 overlay?
Oh, you're good. Yes, 1917 over 1918 B, 1918 over 17 D for Denver. It was minted in Denver during the Spanish influenza. And I showed him that coin. And that night we heard sirens, and the ambulance came and took him, and he died of a pulmonary edema, which of course, for years I blamed myself that I had been so insensitive. I had asked him to climb a flight of stairs. You know, little kids do that to themselves. And I did it to myself, certainly. Right after that, I had been thinking of going into law school, and I had some interviews set up on the East Coast. My mom said to me, "What kind of a son would leave her widowed mother who had just lost her father?" And I thought, okay, well, I can't leave Detroit. And by then it was the summer of 1965, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I had to have some wisdom teeth pulled out. I went downtown Detroit and had my 4 wisdom teeth pulled out. They gave me nitrous oxide. I was a little groggy, and I hadn't really factored that into the trip home. So I was riding my motorcycle, living in Detroit, taking care of my mom, not able to go to law school. And I pulled over because my head was a little bit light, and I noticed that I had pulled over my motorcycle right in front of Wayne Medical School, Wayne State University. I didn't even really know that there was a medical school there, I don't think. And I was a little dizzy, so I took my helmet off, I parked my motorcycle, and I just walked into the medical school. And I saw this sign which said, Office of Admissions. And I thought, well, I mean, it was August. Medical school was starting in September. And I said, "Is the admissions officer here?" I'm not sure what I was thinking. And he came, and he was really nice. He was a pathologist, and we got to talking about his interest in cancer and immunotherapy. I mean, this was 1965. And he said, "Why are you here?" I said, "Well, my dad died, my grandfather died. I can't go to law school. There are no law schools that would accept me at this time. No medical schools either. It's August." And he said to me, "Well, have you taken pre-med?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, have you taken the MedCat, medical school tests?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, would you be willing to take the test now? Not so that we could think about admitting you now, it's August, but just so we could see if you're medical school material ever." So he had some old medical school admission tests, and they brought him in. I took the tests, they scored them, and he came back and he said, "This is crazy, but we've just had a student cancel his admission. We have a vacancy. Now, we have a waiting list, but I just scored your test. I think you could do pretty good here. We've never done this before, but we've never had a cancellation this late in the year either. And if we have a cancellation, maybe we could have an admission this late. I'm going to call the dean, but before I do that, I've got to ask two questions. One, if we offer you admissions, you promise you would take it and you would graduate?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "And second, there's no possibility of any financial aid. Would you be able to pay for your medical school?" And I thought about that damn nickel that had killed my grandfather. And, selling that would pay for medical school. I said, "Yes." And medical school, for those listening, was $375 a semester. So it wasn't like now. And he called me that night and he said, "Well, we've never done this before, but congratulations." That's how I got into medical school.
So you go through med school, and I want to kind of move us along to India. But before then, there was some punctuation marks and some hints of things to come. One of them was a rescue mission on Alcatraz. And who is Wovoka?
Wovoka was a Paiute Sioux Indian medicine man in the 1800s who created the ghost dance. Mm-hmm. And in 1969, when the federal government declared Alcatraz surplus property, that triggered a treaty, the Laramie Treaty. The Treaty of Laramie said that any land seized by the federal government from Native Americans, upon that land being declared surplus property, it reverts back to the ownership of the tribe. So some Native Americans asked to have Alcatraz returned to them, and of course, in keeping with the long tradition, we did not honor our treaty obligation. Then a group of Native Americans took over Alcatraz. They lived there for a year. It was a cause célèbre, and the Coast Guard did an embargo. There was no water, no electricity, no food, but people like Buffy St. Marie and Joan Baez and the Grateful Dead would come out on the island, and it was a party in a way for a while. And the local newspapers supported the Indians, and most of the people in the Bay Area who loved the Coast Guard, but loved the Indians even more. Mm-hmm. And then things got bad on the island. The Coast Guard tightened its grip. The government tightened its grip. A woman on the island, Lou Trudell, wanted to have her baby on Indian-held land. There was no doctor to go out there and help. And one of the columnists, Herb Cain, every day began to write, "What kind of a world is this when there's no doctor willing to go out on the island? There's no doctor to go out. This is terrible. I can't believe there's not one doctor willing to go and live on the island." And of course, that to me looked like an ad that said, "Larry, come live on Alcatraz." And I did. And I helped the delivery of the baby. And they named that baby also Wovoka, in fulfillment of prophecy that the first Wovoka had said that after he had died, he would circle the earth for a certain period of time in a spirit realm, and then he would be reborn on Indian-held land. And when he came back, the buffalo would return, and the Indian way would return. So it was a mystical night with, you can probably feel it even now, the feeling that it gives you in your spine and your body. It was a magical night. And a lot of things happened on the island that night. And one of them led to a young brave who had been a Green Beret slicing his arm, and we had to medevac him. He was bleeding pretty profusely. So he and I kept sewing him up. We were bundled off in a Coast Guard cutter and brought back to San Francisco. And he was sent off to the emergency room, and I was covered with blood, and a lot of TV cameras were kind of thrust into my face saying, "What do the Indians want?" And that led to Warner Brothers seeing the TV show and offering me a job on a movie they were making as a extra, a young doctor, hippie doctor, and also as the rock doc for the concerts they were going to put on.
Very, very cool. And I think there was a seed planted as well for, I don't want to use the term fearlessness, but that was a rough evening from what I understand.
Yeah, that was a rough evening. It was also an evening of tremendous love and compassion. A young Indian named John White Fox, who had been, I think, crippled from polio, but it could have been cerebral palsy. He had crutches. And he stood in the way of a big, tall Indian who didn't think they needed me on that island at that time. And he saved my life.
From there, from Warner Brothers, from your experiences, how did you end up in India and on the Silk Road, and whose Wavy Gravy and the Hog Farm commune bus, and I think there was even a Sterling bus, if I'm not mistaken.
Sterling Hog.
Sterling Hog, thank you.
So my first job for this, I just finished my internship. And my first job for Warner Brothers was to vaccinate the crew, because we were going to England, and to come back to the United States in those days, you had to have a little yellow card that said you'd been vaccinated against smallpox. So I was vaccinating the crew on Pier 39 or whatever pier we were at. And one of the first people to come in line was Wavy Gravy. And at that time, he had a set of teeth made that were the color of a rainbow. Remember Vibgyor, violet, indigo? So when he smiled, he literally had a rainbow in his mouth. And when I met him, I knew I had never met anybody like this before. And he had a duckbill hat on with a real duck's real bill. I thought, okay, well, I'm meeting somebody I've never met before. And Wavy was a clown, and he was one of the people who was running the hog farm commune, and they had all been hired as extras on the bus. Mm-hmm. By the way, Wavy and I have been best friends now since that day, and have traveled all over the world together. His wife, Jahanara, and Wavy, and my wife, Elaine, who is now Garija, we've been together, all of us, for almost 50 years as good friends. So I knew that this was interesting to me, and the hog farm was interesting to me. And my wife and I had this little German Westphalia camper, the icon of the 60s, mm-hmm. and that was the medical bus. And we were like the caboose on this trip of 20 buses that were all 40-foot buses. And we did concerts in Boulder, Colorado, for example, where you're from, and in Washington on the Mall, and in Placitas, New Mexico, on Yellow Springs, Ohio, all over. And we had people like Pink Floyd and the Grateful Dead and Jethro Tull and all the great musicians of the time doing these rock concerts. And I became the rock doc. But when we got to London and did the final concert in Canterbury with Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, mm-hmm. we decided we wanted to keep going. The movie was over, but Warner Brothers had a lot of rupees because there was no Bollywood yet. Most of the movies in India were Warner Brothers movies. And instead of paying our trip back from London to San Francisco, they gave us return tickets from India. So now we had to get to India. So we bought 2 buses. We did concerts. We raised money. And we traveled from Canterbury to Kathmandu. Now, we lived in Afghanistan and Iran and Iraq and Pakistan and India and Turkey. Every time we would come in with these 2 buses, psychedelic painted buses, we'd go to little villages, and I would be the doctor and Wavy would be the clown. We must have looked like Martians. We were so weird. These big buses coming into these little villages. But every time, if it were a Hindu village, in the center of the village, there'd be a shrine. Maybe there'd be a little statue, an idol, a murti of Ram or Sita or Vishnu or Shiva. If it was a Buddhist village, there'd be a statue of Buddha. If it was a Muslim village, there'd be a picture of Mecca. And not every time, Michael, but 1 out of 10 times, 2 out of 10 times, right next to that picture of Mecca or Buddha or Ram, there'd be a picture of John F. Kennedy. Wow. Now think about that part of the world today. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran. In the littlest villages, in the Kurdish villages near Mount Ararat, there was a picture of John F. Kennedy. Why? What did it mean? Aspiration. It meant that somewhere in the world, to those villagers who had never been out of their village, there was a country that was strong and good. Hillary Clinton says America is great because we are good. Well, I don't know if we were really all that good, but aspirationally we were good. And you think about that now. A picture of John F. Kennedy all throughout India, all throughout Pakistan, all throughout Afghanistan. It's going to be a long time before there'll be a picture of another American president in those villages. We need to build a country that we deserve that kind of love because we earn it.
I think you hit a key word in there too. Love.
Yeah.
To focus, get back to the love. In fact, that's a perfect segue. And I was sitting here, as I was listening to the early part of your question, what blew me away was seeing the thread of your life and seeing the thread that led right through the eradication of smallpox and the jeeps going into villages as your bus is going into villages. And I'm going, wow. And I don't want to jump that far forward yet. We're going to get there in just a few minutes because we got to keep an eye on the clock. But when we talk about love, there was something at this time that really hit you, which is Ram Dass and Be Here Now.
Yeah, so when I was an intern, I got one night a week off, which was Thursday night. And again, serendipity, in San Francisco, Ram Dass had just come back from meeting my guru, Neem Karoli Baba. I didn't know about Neem Karoli Baba. I didn't know about Ram Dass. But we saw a little ad which said that Ram Dass was speaking every Thursday night at the Unitarian Church. That was the night that I had off. So my wife and I went to all 3 of his lectures. And we were, as you said, blown away. And the last lecture ended by him saying, I'm going to take these lectures and put them in a book. It's going to be called Be Here Now. If you leave $3.33 as you go out and a card with your name and address on it, I'll mail you the book. Mm-hmm. Well, we left San Francisco. We were in India. Our buses got to New Delhi. We hadn't thought about Ram Dass or that book. And like all other young travelers at the time, we did the customary ritual of pulling into New Delhi and going to American Express. Because American Express is where you got your mail and where you got your money. And we were broke. We hadn't heard from our homes. There were no phones to call back to the States. There was no cell phones or internet. So we were 40 young people in 2 buses. We parked and blocked the streets. And Wavy went in to get his mail, and he wound up standing in line behind Ram Dass, who happened to be there. He had just come back to India. Another bit of chance. And they went in line, and Ram Dass had just got a copy, the very first copies of Be Here Now, the proof copies, the printer's copies. And without even opening them, he took one of those and gave it to Wavy, who he'd known for a long time. And he wrote on the top of it, to Wavy Gravy and the Hog Farm, the Hanumans of the 60s. I didn't know what Hanuman was. I sort of had seen the monkey god a little bit. But we sat down in the bus, all 40 of us, and we read that book. We didn't move until we finished reading that book. And I think for people of my generation, we remember where we were when John F. Kennedy died. And we remember where we were when we read Be Here Now. It changed me. It opened me up.
Started you, would you say, on a inner journey?
Yeah. And Be Here Now is not overtly about Ram Dass's guru, Neem Karoli Baba, who became my guru. But it really is. And when you read it again with those eyes, you see that he's really writing about his guru. But we wanted to find that man. And he lived in an ashram far away, kind of this mystical hiding of the guru. Mm-hmm. If you take a map of India and you look at Nepal and Tibet and China and India, where they all converge in that corner, that's where this ashram. That's Kenshi. That's right. It's on the Silk Road. It's part of the Kumaon Hills. It's a magical place. So that's where we went next, and we lived there.
How was it meeting Neem Karoli Baba, Maharaji?
Well, for my wife, who was a devotee and loved him, it was pretty simple and straightforward, just bliss. It was more complicated for me. I didn't like a lot of the things that I saw. I was a scientist. I wanted to be convinced, but I didn't like the idol worshiping. It's something about the, thou shalt not have any false images, Bingo. That kind of stuff. Yeah. And I didn't like the touching of feet of the guru. It's hard to grow up in a Jewish community in Detroit and feel comfortable about that, or Christian community. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like the cult-like atmosphere. It felt like to me. All the young Americans who were there would kind of push each other aside and jump over each other to get close to the guru. So I was not completely convinced. I was very skeptical. And after I'd been there for about a week, maybe even 10 days, one day I told Girija that I wasn't going to come the next day. I wasn't feeling well. And
that's Elaine's name that she took when she was there.
Well, that's the name that Maharaji gave Girija. It was Elaine. Mm-hmm. I tell her she was Elaine Feldman. Now she's Girija Brilliant. That's quite an upgrade. I mean, really. Woohoo! She sometimes agrees. So she was quite confident that she belonged there. Mm-hmm. I was uncertain, and I took a day to go on a lake and get a little boat and just kind of paddle my way around, trying to find things that were beautiful, flowers that I could put into my head, and nice moments to look at the Himalayas that would give me some peace. And I started to pray. And I hadn't prayed in my adult life. And that was my dark night of the soul, St. John's dark night of the soul. That was my moment of, that was one of my lowest moments. I wanted a sign mm-hmm. that I belonged there, or else I knew that I would leave, and I knew that meant leaving my wife, who I loved. And in the end, I started bargaining with God in every language I could muster, mm-hmm. Every prayer I could give in Hebrew or Tibetan or Sanskrit or English. And I got no sign. It got desperate. I was pleading with God to show me a little rainbow in an oil slick on top of the lake. Not even there. So I figured it was time for me to go. Mm-hmm. But she was going to stay. So I packed my bags that night. We were crying. And she said, "Will you at least say goodbye to him?" I said, "Well, yeah, I may be a skeptical scientist, but I'm not without manners." So the next morning we went down, and as luck would have it, we were the first ones there. And the ashram was empty. And we went in, and he would always sit on a wooden bench. It was called a tucket, like Little Miss Muffet sitting on a tucket. And the villagers would bring in flowers and apples, and they would arrange them in a mandala mm-hmm. that said God's name, Ram. And an apple fell off of that mandala. And I looked at it, and from my kind of my Jewish tradition, God's name was now incomplete. And it didn't feel right to me that, and just without even thinking, I reached down, got on my knees, and I grabbed the apple, thinking I was going to put it back and complete the name of God, Ram. And Maharaji, as we called Neem Karoli Baba, burst through the doors like an operatic singer, saw what was going on, and just stomped on my hand. So my hand was holding an apple, and this, I don't know, he couldn't have been more than 5'5" man who felt like he weighed a ton, had pressed my hand against his foot, and I was on my knees, exactly the place I swore I would never get into.
I won't get down on my knees.
I won't get down on my knees. I won't touch his feet. And he looked at me and he started to laugh. And he pinned me down there and he said, "Where were you yesterday?" And he began chanting and joking and playing with my beard. And I felt that, what I felt from him was absolute love, like I'd never experienced it. Unjudgmental love, unconditional love. And I do remember a moment, and this is what hooked me. I do remember having this transient thought, well, okay, he loves everybody in the world. I get it. That's his job. He's a guru. But what is this creeping sensation that I have running up my spine? I feel like I love everybody in the world. And I didn't know that this machine had been wired to feel that kind of love for everyone. I didn't know. It didn't come with an operating manual. I didn't know. And when I felt like that, I realized I wanted to stay. And I'd kept the taxi waiting with my luggage. And it took me over an hour to finally just leave and be able to walk enough to go to the taxi and tell the taxi to leave my suitcases there, my backpack, there at the ashram. And Girij and I stayed.
It's fascinating. I had a dream last night. I was asking for something from Maharaji, some sort of sign myself. I don't know that I got it, but I jot my dreams down each morning. I write my dreams down, and there was a lake in it last night, and a lake that I went back to, and there was some significance, and I wrote down significance of lake, and then I'm reading about this lake, and then from, maybe we can even say from an intellectual point of view, he knew why you were at the lake. He knew that what the bargaining was you were doing. He's like, you've been trying to speak with God, haven't you?
Yeah, that's exactly what he said. And of course, my mind raced, well, there weren't that many Americans. Somebody could have seen me at the lake, but they didn't know what I was thinking. Mm-hmm. And it became too improbable for him to have been told by anybody where I was. And this was, a 30-minute drive away. My mind raced until it couldn't race anymore. The computer in my CPU raced as fast as it could until it just died.
Which is pretty awesome.
Pretty awesome.
So we're going to do the fast-forward version of saving the world here. Maybe you can tell us, Dr. America, how you ended up starting to work for, or what Maharaji told you to do. Let's go with it that way.
So he did. He used to call me Dr. America. That was my name. And Girija had the name Girija, and Ramdas had Ramdas, and Krishnadas had Krishnadas. And there were all these Das brothers. And I didn't like the name Dr. America. I wanted a name that showed that he had accepted me as a student. And that was one of the Das brothers. One day, I was sitting and meditating off in a corner. He always used to throw apples at me when I meditated, not at anybody else. I never noticed. He threw apples at everybody, mm-hmm. but the ones he threw at me seemed to be strategically aimed. And I jumped up, and he called me over, and he said, "Dr. America, meditation is really important. You should do it. Prayer is important. Love is important. These are all really important things for everybody. But for you, I have a little extra. I want you to leave the ashram. I want you to go down to Delhi. I want you to go into the United Nations World Health Organization, and you will get a job. And you will go to villages and give vaccinations and help eradicate smallpox. Go. It's a little more complicated than that, a little funnier than that. And it took a little longer than that. But I did it. I went down to Delhi, which was about a 15 or 16 hour trip, train and bus and rickshaw. And I walked into the WHO office wearing an ashram gown and a beard down to my knees and hair down to my back. And they kicked me out in about 10 seconds. And I came back up to Maharaji and he said, "Did you get your job?" And I said, no. Go back. And over the next 6 months, I repeated this, what seemed like folly to me, 15 times, 12 times, 17, I don't lost track of how many times. And over time, I got a little smarter and I trimmed my beard a little bit. I got rid of the gown. I put on a pair of pants, a shirt. I actually went and got a jacket from an Indian friend and a terrible tie. And once he said, "Go immediately, right now." And I did. And I walked into, 17 hours later, I walked into the WHO office and there was an American there, first American I'd seen in the World Health Organization office in New Delhi. And he said, "Well, who are you?" And I said what I had said a dozen times already. "Hi, my name's Larry Brilliant. I'm a doctor. I'm living in an ashram in the Himalayas. My guru, who lives in the Himalayas, said that I'm supposed to work for WHO and help eradicate smallpox. He said smallpox will be eliminated as a cause of suffering. This is God's gift to humanity. Who are you?" And he said, "Oh, I'm D.A. Henderson. I'm the chief of the Global Smallpox Program from Geneva. We don't have a program for smallpox in India. Mrs. Gandhi hasn't approved one. But it's nice to meet you." And he went upstairs, and I was waiting to go and meet the person I was supposed to see, and I got a phone call. "Come upstairs. You'll be interviewed by D.A. Henderson." He interviewed me, and I stayed for 10 years. 10 years later, D.A. asked me to go back to India to turn off the lights on the program. We had successfully eradicated smallpox. And he asked me to take all the files and make an archive out of them for posterity. And I did that, and I peeked. You're not supposed to do this. At what he had written 10 years earlier about me in my interview. And what he wrote was, "I have today interviewed a young man named Larry Brilliant. He says he's a doctor. He doesn't look like one. He wants to work for WHO, but there's no smallpox program. I don't think there's a job for him. He appears to have gone native." And I'm going to DA's funeral next week. He just passed, and 87. He became the dean of Johns Hopkins and a wonderful leader. And that's really what happened to me, Michael, is I got to meet some of the greatest leaders in public health. Bill Foege, Steno Jezik, M.I.D. Sharma, this amazing, incredible woman, Nicole Grasset, who's actually the one who hired me when she had a dream about Maharaji. And this is a Calvinist woman raised in, she was the head of the Pasteur Institutes in France. She said, "I can't believe I'm even saying this, but I think your guru wants me to hire you." And so many things happened when I was in India that I can't explain.
Why do you say the opposite of faith is rigid certainty and doubt is a constant companion of true faith?
Yeah, if you think about, people always say the opposite of faith is doubt. Those are two very different things. Doubt comes from the rational mind. You give me a question and you say, "Who's going to win the election?" Or how far are we away from Palo Alto? And I will give you an approximation, but I'll have some mathematical skepticism, or I'll doubt that'll happen. You ask me, can I hit a ball 100 feet? I will doubt that I can do it. Those work with the prefrontal cortex, the executive functions. Now let's talk about faith. That's not where faith comes from. Faith comes from the heart. It comes from the limbic system. I don't know where all the places in the body faith comes from, but they're not even in the same world. So doubt can't be the opposite of faith. What is the opposite of faith is certainty. If you are an atheist and you're certain of it, that's the opposite of faith. If you think you can handle the trials and tribulations of the world on your own without help, that's the opposite of having faith in God. If you're a Buddhist and you want to have faith in something. So doubt and faith don't go together in the same way as opposites, but I don't know anybody who has faith who hasn't climbed a wall of doubt to get to the pinnacle of faith. And besides this, I think faith is bestowed upon you as a gift for climbing that mountain. It's not something that you can go out and buy you can't go to Costco and buy faith. It's something that is given to you by your experiences, and to me by God, in the way I look at it. So yeah, I think that doubt is the constant companion of faith. It is certainly not its opposite.
Thank you. We'll try to wrap things up quickly. There's something Maharishi taught you about 420 and the Bhagavad Gita. Well, no, he didn't tell me about 420. In America, 420, of course, means marijuana, and 420, April 20th, is pot day for lots of reasons. India has a 420 that has nothing to do with marijuana. It's the penal code that was left behind by the British. It's 420 in India. It's 421 in Nigeria. They're pretty close. And it's the penal code for lying and cheating and corruption. So in the penal code, you can go to jail for corruption. So the Indians always say, don't do any 420 with me. It's called char so bis. It's like mischief or cheating. And in the smallpox program, there was a lot of petty corruption in the Indian officials. Hiding of cases, not reporting, taking bribes to vaccinate again, using one kind of vaccine or not vaccinating. And I was in the middle of the fire of trying to eradicate smallpox. We had 150,000 people. We made 2 billion house calls, going to every single house in India 20 times. From the day I joined WHO until the last case of smallpox on a little island in Bangladesh, there were more than 250,000 children who were stricken with smallpox. A third of them died. It was a horrible Hieronymus Bosch, Dante's Inferno kind of experience. And when I came up against that corruption, which was making it difficult for us to reach our goal, I went to Maharaji and I said, I want to talk to you. He would always, we had the greatest deal. We worked on the weekdays in WHO, and the weekends we went up to the ashram, and Maharaji talked to me like a friend and a mentor and like a consultant on how to eradicate smallpox. And I said, well, what do we do about the corruption? And he had me memorize a shloka from the Bhagavad Gita, which is Krishna's advice to Arjuna about what you must do, what your dharma is, and how does dishonesty and deceit enter into the mind. And it's all due to attachment and misremembering things and confusion of the mind. It's really a beautiful shloka. So that was 420. Thank you. Who was Rahamini Banu and the red balloon photo?
Yeah, you could show that picture. This is the picture of Rahima Banu.
Where do we find it?
It's one of the last photos in the book.
Okay.
So she was a little girl on Bola Island in the Bay of Bengal, and she was the last case of killer smallpox in history, the last case of variola major.
I knew there was a reason. I apologize. I knew there was a reason because I read the whole book. I'm like, I didn't see photos. It's not in my draft copy.
Oh, you have a draft copy. I'll
I have
send
a draft
you another
copy.
one. Oh, I'll send you one with pictures.
Thank you. Sorry to
Well, that's
interrupt.
great. I could actually get a copy and show it to you.
Please, 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 yes.
Hold on.
Oh, wow. So up and centered. If we come to your left a little bit more, perfect. Wow.
You see that?
Beautiful big balloon with this girl holding it. Absolutely.
So when she got smallpox in October 1975, and when she coughed and the viruses left her body, or when her scabs fell off and they landed on the hot earth in Bangladesh, and the sun killed and sterilized those viruses, and there was no one else around her who had not been vaccinated or who had had the disease to infect. That was the end of transmission of a disease that goes back to Pharaoh Ramses V, at least 5,000 years, probably 10,000 years. When she recovered, it was the end of a disease that killed 500 million people in the 20th century, 500 million, more than the First World War and the Second World War and Spanish flu. It was the end of a disease that killed 25 kings and queens and emperors. It was the end of a disease which was so ubiquitous that in many places it was just accepted, not as a disease, but as a visitation from God. And it was a triumph, because people from all over the world, Russians and Americans who had 40,000 nuclear weapons pointed at each other, buried those hatchets to work together. Doctors from 170 countries came together. Hundreds of thousands of people worked for years. We showed that a group of people who came from every religion, whose faces were like the colors of a rainbow, every race, every religion, every language, came together to conquer the worst disease in history. That picture is what makes me optimistic. And it's hard for me to get pessimistic, because I've seen what we can do. All this talk that we are an incompetent species, that we can't do anything together, that we have to retreat into our little our identity politics, work only with people who look like us. It's just not true. We are so much better when we're united. We take on a grand challenge like this. And that's, to me, the lasting message from my book and from my life.
Woohoo! Where can people go to find out more, to find your beautiful book? If you want to know how he did it, everyone, get this book. If you want to, this is such an incredible, inspiring read. And I was telling Larry before the show, you can open almost to any page and find guidance in it. It is so incredibly special.
Thank you. Well, you can get it at Costco. I was so surprised. You can get it at any local bookstore. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I have a website, larrybrilliant.com, which gives the bookstores that you can get it at. It's Harper One. You can get it on Kindle. You can get it on audiobooks. I'm really surprised to see the distribution, and I'm very happy about it.
Well, thank you so much, Larry. I don't know if you have any time for words of wisdom. I'd ask if you have any last words.
Well, I often get asked especially by kids when I give a talk, what are there any guiding principles? That's a big challenge. The quest throughout history for a guiding principle. In philosophy, it's called the quest for the Summum Bonum, the highest good. In the New Testament, a rabbi comes to Jesus and asks him, what is the highest commandment? That's the Summum Bonum. We each asked ourselves, what is the highest principle that we base our life on? And the one that I ask people to think about is what Mahatma Gandhi said when he was asked this question in the middle of the independence struggle from India, from the United Kingdom, from England. And he said, I will give you a magic amulet, a talisman, that will protect you from ever making a mistake, always doing the right thing. But this amulet that I'm going to give you is not made of gold or silver. Mm-hmm. It's made of words. And here are my words. Before you act, consider the face of the poorest, the most vulnerable, down on their luck, disheartened, powerless person you have ever met. And then just simply ask yourself whether the next deed that you're going to do will benefit that person. If it will, you're safe. You're on the path to doing only righteous things. If it won't, look again. Think again. That's his magic amulet.
Thank you so much, Larry. I cannot thank you enough. We, the collective we, cannot thank you enough. But I'm an announcer without words. Thank you so much, Larry. We got to let you get going. This has been so beautiful. Everybody, go out and get Sometimes Brilliant. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get Sometimes Brilliant, and find your greatest deed, and shine bright. Woo-hoo!
Thank you. Thank you.
Ram Ram.
Ram Ram.
Thank you, Larry.
I got to go. I just saw the time. I can't believe it, but I loved it.
Thank you. I'll be in touch. God bless.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos coming up. And check out our website. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!